I am. Thank you for the recording, Carrie. So I'm hoping that by the time that we get to the finance related items that he is able to join us, but if not, we'll figure it out on the fly. The second thing is I do want to add an item to the agenda, but we'll add it at the very end, and that is to update the authorized signers on our VSBA checking account. What I will say though is if for some reason we are running super late this evening, I will just punt that item to the June meeting. All right. With that, then I just want to jump into things. We have Terry McCabe with us again for the final of our three-part installment of VSBA board training. And Terry is here to wrap it up for us, put a bow on it, make us all feel great and fully trained. But Terry, why don't you take it away?
Oh, thank you, Neil. Boy, those are big shoes to fit. But thank you. I'd like to start out tonight by just asking if anybody has any comments about regarding the last two sessions, something you learned, something you disagree with, something that's helpful. Okay.
Oh, come on, gang, don't be shy.
That's okay.
Not now. All right. Carry
Well,
on.
we'll start then. I thought we'd start out by doing a really brief overview of the governance structure that you're dealing with and best practices of nonprofits, and then we'll get into the self-evaluation. And I'll be interested as we go through the self-evaluation reflections, whether you're seeing a change. You took this in January. Now you've been through a couple of sessions talking about what your role is on a nonprofit board, and a lengthy discussion about conflict of interest. So feel free to jump in. This is meant to be interactive as we discuss some of the points, some of the observations I made looking through the survey. First of all, reminder, as a nonprofit in Vermont, you're governed by state statute. It tells you what your obligations are to the nonprofit. You're also governed by your own bylaws and by the policies that you've established. Your body of resolutions tells you the positions you're going to take on different issues in the state. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, only because somebody questioned whether a resolution was a policy in the self-evaluation. So I think it's really important to hit on that part, make sure that everybody's clear of the difference of what a policy is and what a resolution is. Some of the best practices are that all the volunteers, the individuals who make up your board, should be committed to representing the best interests of your organization and its mission. And one of the reasons we got into the conflict of interest session last time was people appear to be having a conflict, which would be normal, between what your local board priorities are and what the priorities are of this nonprofit board. And so it's really important for you to understand and recognize when those differences happen and those conflicts happen, and talk about what your next steps are. The association has a responsibility to provide its board members with clearly stated expectations and what the responsibilities are. Again, we've got the statute, the bylaws, the policies. A lot of that information is easily accessible to you. I highly recommend that individually you look at it, and then as a board, maybe at your retreat in June, you might take a look at some of that information as well. You want to be engaged as a board in a dialogue regarding your mission. Is it where you want to be? Is the strategic goals the goals that you want in place? Remember that your responsibilities extend beyond the boardroom and liaisons with other state associations, with your local boards, with the legislature, and how important that is to keep those relationships strong. You want to regularly review where your conflict of interest policy, and in your case, you've embedded your conflict of interest into your code of ethics. Nothing wrong with doing it that way. You may want to look at something different. I don't know, but you should be reviewing it on a regular basis and make sure that your code of ethics, well, all policies really, but your code of ethics and your conflicts policies are where you want them to be. You should be discussing on a regular basis the policies that you have. You should engage in regular self-evaluations. And I know Neil and Sue and I had a conversation about this recently and about how often that should happen. And that will be something that the board should talk about. How often do you want to engage in this? And where you have turnover, what impact does that have in how often you do your evaluations? And hopefully, through all of this board development, you'll be able to identify if you have a conflict of interest yourself. And you can, as a group, decide how you want to handle that. Once you identify it, and you could set something down in writing how you want to deal with it. My recommendations at this point is, if you feel you have a conflict or you wonder if it's a conflict, have that conversation with Neil or Sue and try and figure out how best to handle that on the VSBA board. Any questions? And last time I sent out to you a conflict of interest checklist. We'll just run quickly through it. Think about, does it impact you directly or your family? How does the conflict impact your local school district? Are you asking the members or staff to favor your position over somebody else's in this conflict? Are you associated with another organization which could find the VSBA position in conflict? And are you associated with a body that will determine the outcome of an issue that you're involved in? And as we said the last time, after you go through that checklist mentally or on paper, then you have to decide, nope, no conflict with this, or I have a conflict, and here's the next steps I'm going to take. So what I'd like to do now is, I've come up with a list of some reflections as I go through this. And if somebody has another revelation about the self evaluation, please let me know and we can discuss it. The first one was, if you looked at it's the obligations to VSBA. I found that the theme that I found throughout many of the questions was, individually, you each believe that you adhere to your obligations to VSBA. No doubt about it. I think, let's see, if you understand your role, it's almost a 5. There were only 2 people that scored a 4 on that. But the interesting piece to me was that as a whole board, it appeared to me that you weren't as comfortable that the whole board adheres to their obligations to VSBA. So my first thought is, why is that? And a conversation, is it the COVID effect? You're doing remote meetings more. You don't have that personal connection, sitting next to somebody and having a conversation. Any thoughts on that? No. Okay. Anyhow, it's just something to think about. And as I think about your going into your retreat in June, it may be a great time to have a conversation about why is it that you individually feel like you're doing a great job at being a board member, but you're not feeling that way about your co-members. Because I think about a board, I mean, remember, a board member is only as good as a person, and it's the whole board to make a decision and to act on any issue. So it's really important that you become cohesive, and hopefully the retreat can help with that. It's been a long 3+ years now of the COVID effect, as I call it, and not having that personal connection. So that may be the reason. Certainly
We've got
something to think about.
yeah, and I do have a hand up, so I'm going to go to Mark Koenig, if that's all right.
Sure.
I'm sorry.
Mark had his hand up, so I think he's got a comment.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mark. I didn't see it.
That's okay. I agree with that. I wouldn't categorize it as there's a major difference. I mean, we were mostly at 5s on individual and mostly lower 4s on the group.
Yep.
Which I think is actually pretty standard. I mean, there's what, 24 of us, and you can't really know what's ever in everybody's mind. I think we were all being, precautious. Like I think everyone's doing it, but I can't keep track of everybody. And
Right.
So most of you seem to be doing it most of the time, but I can't, with a clear conscience, say, yes, there's a 5, because that might be wrong. So I actually think the fact that there was this difference actually shows a degree of honesty within our group, where we're just like, well, we want to think it, but we can't prove it, and therefore we're going to hedge our bets.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Mark. I think that's great input. And I should have prefaced this whole thing by, I was really impressed with how you all took your obligations to the association. I mean, you look at these numbers, when I'm talking numbers, I mean, the lowest one I saw on anything was like a 3 something. And those were only in a couple of places. So most everybody is feeling that you are really engaged in your work with VSBA, which is great. And I think the big thing is that you just need to be able to talk about it. And Mark, that was a great input. And I did see that in some comments. I don't really have a clue what anybody else is thinking or doing. So thank you for that. The next one was talking about understanding your role. And it was your expectations about before somebody comes on your board. And maybe people are getting on your board and not necessarily understanding what their role was. And I think when we went through that whole session on the roles and responsibilities and looking at state statute, and a couple of comments that afterwards about, local board versus the VSBA board, and how do you deal with that? And then as you read the comments that are here in your self-evaluation, it became clear that people want to be really involved and engaged and do the right thing with VSBA, but there's a tug back home. And I think that's something that you, as you go forward as a board, might want to spend some time talking about. How are we going to deal with that conflict as a board? How do we want our members to deal with that? Do we want our members to, recuse themselves if their local board has a very different opinion? I think it's a great discussion point as you go forward. Orientation, it's sort of along the same line. Your orientation, just make sure it's robust, and people, when they come on board, understand. I would highly recommend that they start looking at the bylaws and they look at the policies and the resolutions when they first come on board, so that they do understand what their obligations are to the association. It certainly makes a much more cohesive board if everybody's understanding the roles and responsibilities going forward. It was interesting. The other thing, one of the comments that came back on that was that, additional and supportive training is always welcome. And I always feel I have more to learn, but I'm willing, and we all have to be more invested and help out. So the interest is there, the commitment is there. It's just a matter of you guys having those conversations, I think. And again, talking about your local role versus the VSBA role. That was probably one of the biggest disparities. Is you had 4.78 say that once a decision's been reached, they support the board decision. But when you're looking at the whole board, it dropped to under 4. And the biggest move, really, it was a move down. You all of a sudden had people at the average at 3 saying, you know, what 28% of the people then said, well, I think everybody else is only at a 3. The majority of them were at a 4. And you at that point, you only had 2 that left up at a 5. So it's, you know, it's one comment was it's standard operating procedure for school board. But another comment was, for the most part, this year would be a testing year to see how that was going to work. I don't know if that's somebody new on the board or somebody who is starting to look at the obligations you have as a board member. Your strategic goals was an interesting one to me, because that one you had again not a huge disparity, but one of the comments that I saw was, for those not in agreement, this is quite difficult. And my thought on that was, this is a great discussion for your retreat or at another board meeting to discuss about what is it about the missions, the mission that or our goals that you that people are in disagreement with. How do we get a commitment from everyone for our strategic goals? That should be part of your orientation as well, or even an onboarding meeting prior to people running for the board. How do we get everybody to agree that these are there? The other thing that I saw in there, and this was one of the lower answers actually, was how do we best monitor for success? It struck me with some of the comments that were in there that some individuals are having trouble understanding the monitoring process. And I know in a conversation that with Sue, I believe it's every month that you are given an update on your strategic goals and where you stand. But it looked to me like some people were not sure how best to monitor that, or weren't understanding the process. And then we'll move on to the executive director's role. And and that was question 17 for those of you who were I think, wait a minute. 19. Did I do that? No. Yeah, 16 and 17. And so most of you felt like you understood what the role was, but you were concerned that others didn't. And somebody made a comment about micromanaging. Well, your job as the board is to understand and hire your executive director. It may be important for you to review what is the role of the executive director and make sure that you understand your executive director should be implementing your policies, administering your association. And so hopefully again, this is just a matter of not sure how others are doing and not wanting to put a higher score in case they're really not, they don't understand the role. But it's individually, You're at, what, 15 out of 18 answered that they gave us a 5 number on that. It's a great number. Okay, no hands? Okay. The next one I was going to look at was your decisions are in the best interest of VSBA. And if you're trying to follow along with the questions, these are questions 50 and 50, 49 and 50. And it was a pretty strong 4.59. And when it got to the whole board, it dropped again. But the comment that was made after that was talking about that conflict again between the local board and the VSBA board. And it strikes me that at some point, it may be really important for you as an association to have that conversation about how do you expect individuals to deal with that conflict. I can tell you, what statute tells you. I can read what's in your policies, in your bylaws, but as a board, it would be, I would think, very important for you to have that conversation as a board. And so that everybody understands the same information and comes away feeling like they were listened to and that they got to participate in that discussion. Excuse me. And it is tough with the local board priorities. I mean, that was why you're at VSBA, is because of your local board and your interest in helping the kids in your community. But taking that leap also has different obligations. So it's a great conversation for you to have. A lot of our time together has been spent with me just talking and not you as a board having the opportunity to discuss amongst yourselves what you think about it. And that's probably the most beneficial thing you can get out of everything I've said, is for you after the fact to have some conversation about it. And then once a decision has been reached, I support the decision. One comment was, well, that's standard operating procedure for local boards. And I try to, do that here too. And that's great. And that's where it should be, or you should be silent if you can't, accept it. But we all know that that doesn't happen every day. I watch it on my local board. I watch it on other school boards that I follow. But you've got to find how you're going to maneuver between that. And one of the things that came up one of my thoughts as I was going through all of this was understanding how the resolutions really drive much of your work with the legislature. And it's not up to the board to change that. And your policy, your bylaws are pretty clear in that, as Neil had mentioned to me before. So you want to think about that as you're going forward. It's a very difficult task to maneuver any conflict that the VSBA, not the VSBA board, but VSBA has taken as a position. You've got to remember that your membership decided what the position would be. Sue didn't decide it. Neil didn't decide it. You as a board didn't decide it. Your members did. And the quickest way that you can tear apart an association is if there's a split from somebody from the board becoming very vocal about a position that was taken. Your time to really oppose a position for a resolution is during the discussion at your delegate assembly. And then, as it should be on your local board, once that decision is made by 60% of your membership, then even it doesn't mean that your local board can't go and provide a different opinion at the legislature, but you want to make sure that you're not out condemning the position of VSBA, because that just puts a bad light on it. And I'm sure there's nothing more than probably your teachers union would love than to see the board fighting amongst themselves and about their positions. That's what I always say that to local school boards. The minute you start complaining about other board members is the minute that the teachers union sees that they have an in to fight, against the school board. So think of it as at the state level and what that can do.
Terry, I see that Flor has her hand up. Maybe we'll go to her for a question
Okay.
and comment.
Yeah.
It's Terry, I have like a question or comment, and maybe it's something that we could change in the self-evaluation question, because there were two things that not surprised me, but that they were common. There's no mention of our regions. When we do a comment and we say we're worried about our local, we represent a region. So maybe we can be more clear in our next question so that comes up, because I think that would help us as a board to recognize that it's not just our local board, right? That's one of the boards that is part of our region. So that was my comment.
And are you talking about your regular board meetings or at delegate assembly or?
No, as the decision makers, right? All of us that are sitting here represent more than one local board.
Right.
We represent several hundreds of school board members that are in. So I'm in the central region. I have Harvard. I have all of my, and in theory, I'm trying to do my best with Bart to keep in touch with that region, right? So it might be that my local board is against something, but maybe the other 5 boards are pro what VSBA is saying. So ultimately we serve our region, and ultimately we serve the VSBA with Best for All Kids. So I just think that maybe we could tweak a couple of the questions to make sure that we all understand, or to start that. I don't know if that makes sense to everybody, but I think is one of the things that we need to remind ourselves.
Yeah, that's a
that
great
we serve
point.
more than our local board.
Right. Okay, that's a great point. Anybody else? No. Okay, and if we move on, I think that the overwhelming majority of you feel that you could recognize a conflict of interest. And again, your differential in doing all of this seems to be about the same. This one's maybe a little bit more, but it was, and the comments were getting back to the conflict between local or regional and what VSBA's position was. And so what that tells me is we probably ought to be thinking a little more about who decided that this was the VSBA position. And one of my takeaways in reading the comments and looking at the numbers was there's cases where people were, and we'll get into the communication piece, but feeling that they were disenfranchised, or others might be disenfranchised if they brought up an opposing opinion. And it would be interesting to have a conversation about, is it a decision in that case, is it a decision we're making as a board of directors, or is it we're having a discussion about some legislation we're going to testify on, but the decision was made by our delegate assembly and it's a resolution that's in place. And that brings us to the resolutions piece. And if you look at your bylaws and your section, there is, wait a minute, I got to tell you what section it is. Oh, section 16 of your bylaws, it just tells you exactly about what a resolution is, how it's approved, and that whole process. There is no provision in it to change a resolution. I think you do have, you've got a, was trying to think, what was the term? Oh shoot, I'm sorry. I thought I had this right at the top of my, you have two types of resolutions. One was was it a standing resolution, Neil?
Yeah, we've got what's called sort of a regular resolution and a continuing resolution.
It was the continuing one. And then you have your standing resolutions. And then you have decisions if you don't have a resolution, that you have, you also have in there, if you don't have a resolution on a particular topic, that the board of directors can make that decision. But there's no provision for the board of directors overriding a resolution that's been adopted by your delegate assembly, is what I'm trying to get out. So think about that long and hard when you're having your communications. If that's not how the board of directors wants to run things and work through different topics and issues and legislation, then you'd have to go back to your delegate assembly and ask them to change your bylaws. And that should be 2/3, I believe, vote to do a change in that. But maybe that makes it a little bit easier if you start thinking about, okay, this position was actually adopted by the delegate assembly, not by the board. Maybe it makes that conflict a little bit easier to deal with back between your local board and VSBA. Okay, let's see. And we go, communications. And it was really interesting. And again, your numbers are great. You know, you got 4.6 for individuals and 4.35 for the entire board. And I feel like I'm harping on stuff when you really are a high performing board, or, you know, your self-evaluation is telling me that you're a high performing board. But what I saw in this was the majority of you feel that you can express your feelings at a meeting. Although there are people that feel that there are members who are disenfranchised if they're opposing a VSBA position. And that can be one of a couple of things. One of the things that comes to mind immediately is learning styles. And don't forget that, you know, introverts, extroverts. The extroverts are going to speak a lot at your meeting and come and put forth their comments. One of the comments I saw was something about, well, people are, my words, not the words in the survey, but were intimidated to speak up if they felt that they were in opposition. But it also could be that somebody's an introvert and they just need a little more time to think through the issue and what they want to say. And so make sure that you're engaging, and the more that you can communicate amongst yourselves, the easier it will be for those people to speak up as well. The place that you guys really felt like you were not doing your job was communications with the boards in your region. Although I got to tell you, when I read through, it seemed like everybody was trying, but the local boards don't engage. They don't respond. And the other comment that I saw was that VSBA does such a great job of getting the information out that they're feeling So you may want to take a look at what your expectations are for each board member to contact their local regions. Does it make sense that, once every few months you send out something and say, don't forget, if you've got an issue, or you have any questions, this is my contact information. I don't know what's right for you in Vermont and for VSBA, but certainly people are feeling like they're not living up to their obligation as highly as they are in others. You came up, I think it was a 3.28, which is the lowest score you had on anything. And from what I was reading, it sounds like most everybody is reaching out. It's just they're not getting any response. The other thing I would tell you is, and I was a board member for a long time, and I worked for the association for a long time, and part of my job was reaching out to different regions. Board members, as you know, are extremely busy, and they're thinking, one more thing. I don't need to deal with that. They're doing their job. I'm doing mine. I don't have time. So part of me is saying, don't take it personally if they're not responding to you, if they're not engaged. Board members tend to be extremely busy people. And the last takeaway I have from this survey is regarding the legislative process. And I saw a lot of comments on the last question that talked about the need to, that people wanted to be more engaged in that. And again, another great discussion for you as a board to have. How can we become more engaged? But it was clear to me that that's something that everybody was in, or not everybody, but many people were interested in. Sue's probably happy to hear that because it might mean having a few more people come testify. It's, it is an important thing. It's great that people want to get engaged, and you as a board can figure out how best. I know you've got your legislative committee, and you can figure out how best to work that out as a board. I think you've got, some great findings from this survey. I think you've got, a lot of things that you can look towards your retreat and in the next year or so, topics for discussion at your board meetings. Anybody have any other revelations or reflections they'd like to bring up?
Anything, guy? Yes, Adrian, go ahead.
Hi. So can anybody see my video?
No.
I just
No.
I'm gonna well, I put my hand up. I'll leave and join us again. But I did want to say all of your results were not really that surprising to me. And I don't know if that's why we're not commenting terribly strongly. I think we generally have confidence in each other. Mm-hmm. We generally do the right thing, and all those numbers reflect that. So
they do.
I wanted to say it's not that we aren't, interested in the results, but it's really like, okay, that's not what I thought.
You look at these numbers and it's like, okay, well, they don't really need me to talk to them because they know what they're doing.
No, it was very interesting, and I appreciated your time and your talk. So, but I think that's probably some of the reason why you're not getting too many comments.
Yeah,
that's all.
And you guys are doing. I think you're doing a great job, and you seem to be very thoughtful. And reading through the comments just told me how thoughtful everybody was about what their obligations were to the association and to the kids in the state of Vermont and to your local boards. Well, that's what I have.
No, Terry, I would thank you very much. And David Chandler, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I'm one of those introverted ones. It takes a while to get their thoughts organized and decide whether they're going to take the plunge or not. I think I agree with you that mostly we've got it right. I think the issue that you raised by mentioning the conflict, potential for conflicts, and the fact that we get caught between representing our regional issues versus the resolution stated issues. I think that there are assumptions that are made as to whether I may think that I'm totally within my range of what I should be doing, and I should be pushing the cart up to a certain point and then stop. And others may think that I'm overstepping my bounds. So I think there are some nuances in how opinions are expressed that may be misinterpreted, and we may even be more aligned than the results may indicate. But the real point I was trying to make is I do think that we're mostly there, but during a retreat and some of the other things that you were suggesting, I think there should be opportunities for discussions and that would bring out some of the nuances that don't get expressed in a large meeting, that aren't a big broad brush stroke. They're the more finer brush strokes that are worth hearing, but they get lost in the size of the big picture. So that's all I would say.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And, you know, that's the beauty of having a retreat, because hopefully you can get into some of those nuances, or, you know, or scheduling time at board meetings to have discussions, take a topic a month or something and spend a half an hour on.
Yeah, and I just want to follow up on that too. So I think, and I didn't pay David for this, but this is an awesome segue to the work that we're planning for the retreat. I do think that the opportunity for us to get together, and just a reminder, retreats in person, folks, June, the next normal Wednesday in June when we meet, but it's during the day at Killington. And I do think that that opportunity to actually all be in person and to have these discussions that don't have to shoehorn into, you know, a half an hour or an hour at one of these regular monthly meetings, gives us the opportunity to talk about those finer brush strokes, as David mentioned, but also just to engage in a conversation that's a little bit easier in person than it can be on Zoom. I'm going to go to Colleen in just a second, but just to note, like, one of the things that we want to talk about at the retreat, right, I think fits into what David was just talking about, and that is a little bit on board operating norms and how we want this body to work well, efficiently, and what are those standards of operation that we collectively decide we're going to work under. So that's, you know, certainly one of the aspects of the board retreat that we want to hit on. Colleen, go ahead.
Thank you, Neil. And Terry, thank you for your analysis of our results and so forth. That's very helpful. And as Andrea, as has been said by others already, that, you know, probably some of it is, it seems obvious to us, and so there's no opportunity to really disagree. But I did want to reiterate something that David was saying. And you mentioned earlier, Terry, that resolutions drive the work with the legislature. And I think that's like incredibly important for this body to understand its role, that, you know, we're trying to move policy forward, and that resolution and the vote by the larger body, not just the board, but the full VSBA, moves those discussions forward. I will say that over the past couple of years, and Terry, you mentioned something about the impact of, you know, lingering impact of COVID and losing that face-to-face contact and what that means for boards and so forth. It's a challenge. One thing that I really miss is the ability to bring nuance to the conversations, so that when there is discussion that's presented to the larger body, these are the resolutions we're proposing, and here's why, that there is the opportunity to say, we deliberated, these are pros, these are cons, these were the nuanced areas we considered. And for these reasons, we decided to go in this particular direction. And I do miss that both local boards and, perhaps with this body, that that opportunity to really try to understand what the different perspectives are standing in someone else's shoes and really trying to understand the different corners of Vermont. So that's my 2 cents. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. And I think those are all great. That's a great point to work on, and that nuance piece. It's not this, it's better than just text messaging or emailing. Zoom is, but it's still not the same as sitting next to somebody and having dinner or lunch or whatever.
Yeah, and I'll also add too, so you'll see later on tonight, right, one of the things that we're going to do is staff up our resolutions committee, because we are at the beginning of that annual process of getting things going, right? And after this discussion, realizing just how important the resolutions are to this body, right? Want to encourage all of you, one of the things that we've been trying to do, at least one of Phil's goals that he had for us prior to his departure, was to increase attendance at the annual meeting. And that is in part, right, to drive a bigger discussion around those resolutions that guide this body's work, right? The more people that we have involved in that process and engaging at that discussion at the annual meeting, I think it's better, right? I've joked in the past, right? Let's get this conversation done so that we can get to the bar and have a beer. It's really a joke, right? Like if we have to have these conversations go on for a long time, right? In order for the membership to feel like everybody had their voice heard and that the ultimate decision was based on understanding the facts, where other districts were coming from, other people's points of view, right? It just serves us better as an organization. So if we have to miss go getting a beer or happy hour so that we can get to those votes and have decent conversation, right? I will always be in favor of that. And so to the extent that we can group, like you guys are the ones here, right, that are our regional reps, right? Let's see what we can do to increase participation in the resolution process from the very beginning of boards submitting resolution to the very end when we're all together in that room in Lake Maury, right, voting on these things.
And engaging everybody, more people in your annual meeting is what's going to make your association stronger.
Yeah, and I can
Because they
highlight
take
just,
ownership for.
yeah, and the final point on this is one that Flora and I experienced right at the recent NSBA conference. When the room only includes like-minded people, right, the discussion is really short, and part of you ends up leaving that whole experience just slightly unsatisfied that we didn't really talk about anything, right?
Yeah.
And so let's see what we can do by way of increasing participation in our resolutions process for VSBA, and then that ensuing discussion and vote at the annual meeting.
Okay, well, I've really enjoyed working with all of you, and hopefully this gives you some more work for your retreat next month, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you, Terry. Any other comments from board members before we bid Terry adieu? Thank you so much, Terry, for taking the time working with us over these past few months. It has been a pleasure, and we certainly appreciate all the work that you put into it.
Well, and I've enjoyed it. It's been great getting to know you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We say goodbye to our neighbor from the northeast.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you, Terry.
take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, we are slightly ahead of schedule. Is Heather in the waiting room by chance yet or not? No. Okay. Sue, would you be willing to, can I skip down to item 10, which is our strategic plan monitoring reports? If we
Or
could
if
squeeze that in now, that would be
Sure.
awesome.
That would be great. The things that I was going to highlight for you from this report, first of all, are our new staff members. And Kara is on the call. Kara Zimmerman is our new Director of Policy Services and Legislative Affairs. And I don't know if you've all met Kara, so I'll just give you tell you a little bit about her, and then we can see if she wanted to just say a quick hello to you so you know who she is. So Kara is a former school board member, and she served as the chair of the Lamoille South Unified Union Board. Kara, let me know if I got that wrong. I think that's right. She's a graduate of Georgetown University Law Center, and she has served as VSBA's legislative analyst for the past 3.5 years. This is her 4th legislative session, I believe, that she's been working with us. So we feel extremely lucky to have Kara on board. And Kara, would you like to just say hi to everyone?
Yeah, thanks for that nice introduction, Sue. I've been turning my video off because my allergies are so bad. So I want to spare you all my sneezing. Excuse me. It's really nice to meet all of you. I know that I've met some of you over the years through legislative update opportunities. And then also most recently at your last board meeting, I was in person. But I'm really excited to be on board and am happy to be supportive in any way that I can.
Thank you, Kara. We also have Debbie Singeiser coming on next week as our new Director of Board Services, and she will be starting part-time next Monday, May 15th, and she's going to be coming on full-time on June 19th. She is also a former school board member and also served as a chair. She was the chair of the Barstow Unified Union School District Board. And she was also a member of the Rutland Northeast Supervisory Union Board. She is the founder and principal of Career Visor, which she established to support youth with career readiness. And so the reason she needed to start part-time with us is so she could finish up with some of her commitments through Career Visor. So that's why she'll be part-time for about a month before she's full-time, but we're very excited to have her start next Monday on a part-time basis, and excited for all of you to meet her as well. The other things that I wanted to highlight are just all of the professional development for school board members that's going on in the month of May. Monday was the first session for our new school board members, and we had, I believe, about 60 of them signed up for our what we call the first year journey, and that's 2 90-minute webinars. And we've been able to enlist Susan Holson to come back on a temporary basis while we didn't have anybody in the board services role. So she has helped us out a lot with both the first year journey webinars and with the work that's going on for the superintendent and board officer training. So that started with an hour webinar today, but the bulk of that will be given in person next Wednesday in Burlington. And I'm really looking forward to that. We have some great information planned for that, including the Secretary of State and the Deputy Secretary of State will be there to talk about 3 really important things to school board members: open meeting law, Public Records Act, and election laws that can pertain to school board members. So we're very excited to have them join us. We also have a webinar coming up later at the end of this month on making the most of your board retreat. So I think that one's going to be a really good webinar. I had information on here too about the webinar that was given in April. And that was really well received. I believe it had an overall rating of 4.7 out of 5. And some of the evaluation quotes are excellent info, well presented, love the collaboration with other states, very helpful, thank you. This webinar was for all board officers, and David Kemple with the Texas Association of School Boards was, he's a national expert on the topic of board officers, and he was a guest presenter for that webinar. So if you didn't get a chance to experience that webinar live, it is, of course, always available on our website in the archives. So I think that takes care of what I wanted to highlight on the strategic plan monitoring report, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Sue or anyone else on the staff this evening?
I guess I really should also add that it's May is just a really, really busy time for us. We've got the legislature finishing up hopefully by Friday. And so things are very, very dynamic there, and it requires us to be on our toes and keeping track of many different bills, and even some bills that we didn't have to keep track of before because pieces from education bills are getting added into them. Or so it's really, as I said, dynamic, and we've also got all these professional development things going on as well. So I just want to say thank you to the whole VSBA staff for all of your work this month. It's been exemplary. So thank you.
Yes, I echo that as well. Jim, glad to see you got your internet back. And don't worry, just because we were on the strategic plan monitoring report does not mean that the next item is the consent agenda, new business, and adjourning. We just reordered things a little bit.
Really?
So don't worry, you didn't miss your opportunity.
Thought it was just that much more efficient without me. Yeah.
No, I am afraid not, sir. So I am still somewhat hoping that Secretary Boucher is going to join us shortly.
She's not here yet.
She is very punctual if she is coming. I am taking a look here, board. One more thing, then I will just stress right now, a reminder that the June meeting is our retreat, and it is in person. It is during the day on that second Wednesday in June. Is that the 8th?
The 14th.
Oops, sorry, the 14th. Ooh, Flag Day. And I'm encouraging everyone to attend in person. There is not a remote option for that meeting, folks. So please, if you can, rearrange your schedules to get there in person. That would be greatly appreciated. All right. Sue, why don't we do this? It still looks like we're
I would just proceed past that agenda item. I know that we have provided the link to the interim secretary's staff, and they know when it is, but
Okay.
if she's not here, then we'll just
Yeah,
have
why
to
don't we,
do
yeah,
better.
so yeah, why don't we do this? Why don't we jump into the legislative update? And if the secretary shows up, then we can just pause and move on to that item. But why don't we do a legislative update?
Sounds like a good plan. So I'm going to start with that. Sandra and Kara also have some information to provide, but I will just start by letting you know, I think you probably already know this, that we're in the final week of the regular legislative session, and legislators are working to adjourn on Friday, this Friday. We are expecting a veto session, which will be held on June 19th, 20th, and 21st. And that would focus on the bills that the governor vetoes. and there's expected to be a few of those, possibly even the budget. So, but we'll know more as in the next few days, I think. This final week is very dynamic, and we may continue to see changes up to the last minute of the session. So this update is really a snapshot of where we are today, and we'll be working on an end of session report to get out to you after the session is over. A very brief update on H483, that's the public funding of private schools. The Senate Education Committee did take testimony on this bill, but ultimately it looks like they are not going to vote on the bill. So that bill is going to remain in the Senate Education Committee as on the wall, as they say. You know, we have a biennium, so it's possible that it could be taken up again in January. The next bill that I wanted to talk about was S103. That's a bill that proposes to amend the laws prohibiting discrimination in employment and places of public accommodation to provide that harassment need not be severe or pervasive to constitute unlawful discrimination. The House General Committee amended the bill to also lower the harassment standard in Title 16. So that is in schools. VSBA, together with VSBA, VSA, and VPA, advocated that the legislature wait to make the changes to Title 16 until after the anticipated changes to the federal Title 9 regulations are finalized. And the Agency of Education also took that same position. This would give the legislature more time to consider the additional resources that schools are going to need to implement those changes, including beefing up support for the AOE and giving schools time to develop appropriate systems and trainings that are necessary to support this work. The changes to federal Title IX regulations are expected to come out really any time now, probably sometime during this month of May, but it most
Sue?
likely. Sorry?
Heather's in the waiting room.
Oh, okay. Okay. Do you want me
Do you want me to
to
let her in?
leave off there, Neil, and we can resume?
Let me just, did you have any other items that you were going to cover, Sue?
Well, I haven't finished on S103. So you want me to finish that first?
Yes, please.
Okay. All right. So just so you know, ultimately the education language was removed from the bill after House General had put it in through a complicated procedural process. But we do expect the legislature to take the amendment to Title 16 up again next year. So we will want to spend some time working with stakeholders to determine what resources schools will need to better address HHB in schools. House Education introduced a short form bill that proposes to amend the definition of harassment under Title 16 and the corresponding policies and procedures as required under Title 16. And that bill would also proposes to increase staffing and funding for AOE to hear and investigate complaints of HHB, as well as coordinate mandatory anti-harassment, hazing, and bullying training on a regional level through Vermont public and independent schools. That's really that short form bill is really meant to be, it's not anything that's going to be taken up this session. It would be something that the House Ed is signaling that they are willing to take up next session. Senate Education also considered an amendment to the school safety bill, S138, that would task the hazing, harassment, and bullying Commission with studying the current protections for students against harassment and discrimination in schools and to make recommendations for legislative action. So we'll be able to report once the session is over about what happened with that, with the school safety bill, and whether that provision made it into it or not. It's all happening even this afternoon. So that's the end of my part of the report, Neil.
Okay. Any questions for Sue?
I had one question on the Title IX changes. Are those going to actually go into effect, or are they just announcing the draft for comment?
There's two different Title IX things regulation changes that are happening. The ones that we were talking about are going into effect. The draft was proposed last July. It was open for comment until sometime in September. And then we're expecting the final regs to come out within the next few weeks. There's some other Title IX regulations that have to do with sports and transgender students, I believe. And those ones are just getting started.
Thanks, Carrie. Go ahead and let Heather in at this point. But board members, any other questions for Sue on this part? Okay, so we'll jump back in for the second part of the legislative update. But I do want to take this moment in time right now because Secretary has been able to join us. So thank you very much for coming. Welcome to the VSBA Board of Directors. But yeah, I know we had discussed before, we wanted to give you a little bit of a chance to come in, introduce yourself, and if I might be so bold, before you leave, amongst other things, if you could let us know what the planned process is for selecting replacement secretary, that would be fantastic. And then obviously anything else that you would want to share with us.
Sure. Thanks. Hi, everyone. It's nice to see you all. I'm Heather Boucher, and I am currently the interim secretary. It's actually my second time doing this. I did this when Secretary Holcomb stepped down. Now I'm actually officially the interim secretary, not the acting. So apparently things have evolved. It's really nice to get a chance to see you all, if not in person, at least virtually. So want to thank you for your work on behalf of all of our boards. I know it's really important. I know that things are winding down for the school year and hopefully for the legislature, as I heard you just talking about. I think many of us in here, particularly Sue and some others, will be really happy, at least for a brief respite. So yeah, so I've been the deputy for, it'll be 8 years in September. So I really have a lot of experience and expertise now in the way, in all of the regulation, the oversight, the supports that we provide as an agency. I can speak a little bit about kind of currently what we're doing. And then I can also speak, as you mentioned, Neil, about what I know regarding the process. So I am delicately balancing the fact that I am actually the interim secretary with, not trying to make any super bold changes in terms of policy or structure or those kinds of things. Because there will be a process for selecting the permanent secretary. What I hope to continue to focus on, though, are some of the pieces that were already started under Secretary French, and then some other components that I worked on and hold very near and dear to my heart. So we're moving forward with the DQS because that was already in the rules process, so the district quality standards. Have met most recently with the State Board of Ed because they're getting ready to vote out the Act 1 EQS recommendations. So if you're not aware, you probably already are, but there was a subcommittee of the State Board of Ed that was working on those, and they're wrapping up their work pretty imminently. So we'll continue to work, follow that through the process, the district quality standards, and then we'll certainly have a lot more information, conversation, communications, and, just in general, working together on that, like once they're actually, once we get closer to what implementation would look like, because they're going to be very important for your association. I want to thank Sue for her association and her colleagues' help on some of the key components of that. I am keenly aware, as we all are, that it's really tough in our classrooms and our schools. So work that I've done has been to partner with the Department of Mental Health at a state level, and then bring to bear resources using both federal funds and then also all different pots of federal funds to ameliorate and improve mental health challenges, concerns that students are facing, and then also that educators are experiencing. We are just about to close on a contract that will provide some virtual supports for our educators with respect to mental health, counseling, wellness, those kinds of things. And this is actually in tandem with the V-High Path project that we started last year, which is focused on our educators in terms of a more, I would say, holistic approach to really get them engaged in self-care, all kinds of things related to broader wellness. The piece I'm talking about more recently, and again, we're getting very close to finalizing the contract, is for educators that need a little bit more targeted supports around mental health. And so they will have the ability, live to text and get in contact with counselors and therapists. And then the neat thing is teachers educators broadly will have up to 6 sessions that they're able to have. And then if they need more than that, the vendor that we're going with hooks with Blue Cross Blue Shield, which we know is what is used for the teacher's contract. So, well, the contracts, but the you know what I mean. It's been late in the day. So that's gonna continue to be an effort and focus of mine. To say a little bit about myself, I actually am a developmental psychologist. All of my work has been done in the education sphere. My doctorate is in education psychology and school improvement and student performance. But I think my background lends itself well to that kind of understanding about and really depth of understanding and expertise in terms of how to actually broker those 2 different arenas. So mental health and then education. Obviously, that's happening in really profound ways in the field. Part of what we're trying to do with the new contract that's going to be coming out is that we know that there are significant workforce shortages, both for folks who can actually take care of our students in terms of their mental health and their family challenges and those kinds of things, and then also for our educators. So we're trying to really provide some supports around that. We have also previously last session did some grants for LEAs as well around student mental health and helping them boost up their supports. So I think I'm saying that because that's a big concern of mine, and it's something that I'm going to continue to really help us get right in terms of really making sure students and educators have the supports they need. I am trying to think of how to say this. So I actually am where I am because of public education. So I actually grew up quite disadvantaged economically. My family was on public assistance all through my early years through high school, and had what at the time was not called SNAP but would have been called SNAP now. So I guess despite that background, if you will, I got so much support and assistance and really just acknowledgement of who I was and who, I wasn't really my demographics, if you will, in my public education system. And so I ended up going to Cornell University. Sue and I are fellow alumna, and would never be where I am today without a strong public education system. I grew up in New York, and it's always really maintained kind of a core aspect. It's a core. I'm sorry, I'm really tired, and I apologize. I'm not being very articulate, and I'm really sorry. I wish it was not this week, but I'm really happy to see you all. But what I'm trying to say is that that aspect of my identity is a really core part of why I do the work I do, and really why I get up every morning. And so really continuing to build systems that look out for and address the needs of our most vulnerable students writ large is really also critically important to me. And, you know, I'm hoping to stick around. And so you'll see that as something that I'd also want to partner and work on you with in the future. I think I'll pause there with sort of those high points. Neil, you had mentioned if I could just speak to the process. I'm happy to, from what I know. So this has only happened one other time, as we know. So this will just be the second time. We're still kind of, you know, I think just having spent a lot of time in the legislature this week, there's still, I think, some misunderstanding about what the Agency of Education is, that it is actually part of the governor's cabinet. It's kind of interesting in some subtle ways this kind of comes up. But the reason I'm saying that is because what happened last time was the governor reached out to the State Board of Ed. I have no reason to think, because it was this same governor, I have no reason to think that it would be a different process. But as you probably already know, the State Board of Ed does a selection process of its own and is obligated to send a minimum of 3 candidates to the governor, from which the governor will choose. So informally, what I've been hearing is that I know that there are many folks who are interested in furthering the process, probably none more so than myself, just to you know, further stability for the agency, because there is no, by the way, there's no interim deputy. I just want to note that. So it's one person doing both jobs, which is why I'm saying that, if that wasn't clear. So my understanding informally is that the focus for the administration right now is really getting through the legislative session. I don't know if that also includes the veto session, which is likely, or if there will be some attention to this permanent role in between, you know, in the later part of May and June. I can't really say, but that's the messaging I've had so far, is that the real focus is on finishing the legislative session, and then they'll turn to this and probably some other things as well. So that's kind of what I have. It's not really that, you know, fleshed out or anything. I certainly would invite folks to reach out to Jennifer Samuelson, chair of the State Board of Ed, or even certainly the governor's office. Sorry, my coworker is acting up. I apologize for that.
No worries, no worries. Board, do we have any questions for Interim Secretary Boucher? No. So despite your delirious state there, you nailed it, apparently.
I think Mark has a question. I think Mark might have a question.
I do. Thank you, Secretary. And I don't know whether you can answer this or not, but I'm curious. We hear a lot in the legislature about the capacity at the AOE. And I was just wondering whether you could talk a little bit about, are you full now? Are you, you know, how many positions are open, and kind of in what divisions they are in?
Yeah, that's a great question. Very happy to respond. So compared to where we were when Secretary French started 4 years ago, we are in good shape. So there were 26 vacancies at that point. We have nowhere near that number of vacancies overall for the agency right now. However, we have had some vacancies in our leadership team. So we have 2 division director searches. We have interim division directors in their stead. So we have a lot of stability. It's not like the work has really changed all that much. So we have folks that are actually doing that work, but those searches are active right now. One is literally just waiting, you know, to ink it, but I can't say until that's actually fully inked. And another is very close. So those would be the 2 division directors. The special education, the state special education director is under recruitment for a second time. We had a really tough time, as you might imagine, the first time around with applicants. This time we have a much more robust set of applicants, because with my leadership, I knew that if we weren't just using the regular types of recruitment like school spring and that, like we actually really targeted the state school, special education directors network, which there is one, and some other kind of national advocacy groups that really will cater to folks that might want to move from another state or just take the next rung up in their career trajectory. I could spend a lot of time talking about that position. I know that there's a lot of public interest in that position, and I don't know if there's a lot of opinion in your organization, but there certainly are opinions about what that position should be classified as or look like. Again, I'd be happy to chat about that if that's something you're interested in. But otherwise, I think that's an update. And we have our division director for the data management is also vacant, and so that one is just getting started, so it hasn't closed yet. The other ones are all closed in terms of applicants making their way through the pipeline.
Great, thank you. That's really helpful. Appreciate that.
Any other board members with questions? All right, I am not. Oh, David Chandler.
I hope this is a softball question, which is, this is not your first go around in this position. So I was wondering if you had any guesstimate as to how much time you actually have before a decision is made, and what are you focusing on as a result? What kinds of goals do you have for a limited, at least at this point, limited span in office?
Sure. I think it's a great question. So I think consistent with the administration's goal, I think first and foremost, we have some pretty heavy duty legislative bills that are really critical for us to do our very best, I think, collaboratively to get across the finish line in a way that, doesn't, I would say, further dismantle some of the hard work that many of us have been doing in the education sphere. So I think that's really critical. It's been the past, I would say, the last 2 weeks has been better, but in all transparency, the first couple weeks when I started this new role was a little, there was a lot of learning, a big upward, a learning curve, because the way Secretary French and I had structured our work together was that a lot of the big lifts for the legislative session in terms of PCBs and the school safety bill, those were actually led much more, directly by Secretary French. So I wasn't as up to speed on the content of the bills and that kind of stuff. So it's taken me a little bit of time to get up to speed there. Now I fully am up to speed. Some of the others are pre-K, as you know, as part of a much bigger, broader childcare bill. And then just some kind of bits and bobs here and there. I'm sure as part of the school safety bill, late in the session, there was H103, which was a hazing, harassment, and bullying. Well, first it started out as an anti-discrimination, like trying to actually overlay the important work on protecting folks from harassment and discrimination in the employment context, trying to just sort of like overlay that onto the education context, which I think we did a nice job of collaboratively to say, like, this just does not fit. So stop trying to understand what you're trying to do, but students are not employees. And so let's take a beat. So we were successful at, I think, getting, and I hope you agree, Sue, I think we're in agreement on this. We were successful to kind of get that removed from this broader bill. The challenge is some components of that have kind of snuck back into some other bills. And so, I will say we do have some significant concerns about relaxing how some entities are calling this the severe and pervasive distinction, which isn't how it's being talked about is not actually veridical with Title 16. It isn't as you probably already know. And then also, you know, some late in the game changes that we think would potentially really actually, in a weird way, actually remove protections for the very students that I think some folks are trying to actually protect. So I think we've been really keeping our eye on that. So that's taken up a lot of my time. As I said, stabilizing the agency and just finishing and getting these hires done, because these are leadership hires, is really critical for me and important, and just keeping the morale and the work moving and going that we do every day for the agency has been really important to me. You know, I mentioned some of the other topics that are important to me. So, you know, depending on how long the interim role is, I will continue to focus on those. But as I said, I'm not planning on any big, new, huge initiatives. I think that would be unfair to the state and unfair to our local education systems and also the agency, and certainly to any new secretary.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time. Thank you very much for your work. Thank you for spending some time with us tonight.
Great, it's been my pleasure.
And go grab some dinner. Get a little rest.
Yeah, take a nap.
Yeah.
Thank you for your understanding. It's been a long week and it's only Wednesday. So
No worries. You gotta, do something so you can make it through the next 2 days, right?
it'll be good. All right, see you all. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right, Sue, I guess we will flop back now to the second half of the legislative update.
I think we're on to the portion that Sandra is going to present.
Okay.
That's right. Yes. And a lot of this interim secretary, Heather Boucher, just mentioned. So the first one, S56, has been the very large complex bill addressing childcare with a component of pre-kindergarten embedded within it. Draft 8.2 of S56 passed out of House Ways and Means yesterday. That latest draft, I won't go through all of the details, but here are a few highlights. It requires the AOE to report on several data points by August of 2023. It would create a pre-K education implementation committee to assist the AOE in improving and expanding accessible, affordable, and high-quality pre-K education for children on a full-day basis, starting July 1, 2026. It would change the pre-K weight to 1. You'll remember right now it's 0.46. It would change it to 1 if on or before July 1, 2026, the General Assembly enacts legislation establishing 1, a definition for the minimum number of hours that would constitute a full day for preschoolers. 2, a requirement that all school districts follow the same minimum number of hours. And 3, a requirement that all school districts follow the same contracting requirements for the provision of pre-K. Interestingly, as of last night, early this morning, we discovered that there is language that nearly mirrors all of the pre-K and actually the childcare sections of S56 now embedded into H217, which is a bill addressing workers' compensation. So there are 2 bills tracking simultaneously with very similar language, and we're watching both of those. Third reading on H217 was ordered today, and S56 continues to progress at the same time. Do you want me to pause there before I go on?
Yeah, folks have any questions on that one? I got a brief one. It's like, how the hell did that happen?
I know, I'm looking at Jim going like this, like, but.
Yeah, like what is there a method to the madness here of why we've got a...
Sue, do you want me to speculate?
Sure.
You know, it really moving 2 bills at the same time, it just increases the likelihood that something's going to move.
Okay. Mark, go ahead.
One of the qualifications you said was that AOE was going to have to give data by August, except we just heard that they don't have a director of data. They're just starting looking for it. And I know at least for our district, we're years behind in getting data that was owed to us. So what's the likelihood that they're actually going to have data ready in August?
Yeah, I have to wonder, and I did listen to the testimony when they were talking about the data that they need, the General Assembly, and it doesn't exist. So it's also not as easy as just going to collect it. It's also a system to collect it and then going and collecting it, right? So it's a short timeline.
Jim, go ahead.
Yeah, Sandra, I guess I've been reading, you know, it's hard to keep up with everything, but reading some recently that with the childcare bill, one of the biggest issues was funding that could put it all into, you know, big question. If it's the kind of bill that the source of funds to cover it, and you know, whether it's additional payroll taxes or what it is, how can you then just slip it into another, you know, the same issue is there for whatever vehicle? Is that correct? Or, you know, I would think it's more the money people who are now in control of that sort of.
Yes, and there were several amendments to H217 where the language was now just slipped in, and they all were concurred, they all passed. So that bill is moving. The how, I don't know that I can answer the how, Jeff.
Yeah, just kind of curious that, you know, it's still, if there's no source of funding for it, you know, it was presented I just read an article on it today that said it's a very actually one of our legislators reaching out, asking for opinions and saying it's a very expensive bill. I'm just trying to understand how that it's just, if there's no source of funding, will they still just pass a bill even though they have no source of funding and just kind of assume that it'll get taken care of? Or
Tara, do you know the most recent source of funding? Because they have gone back and forth about this.
So the dispute is actually over the source of funding. So the Senate is committed to a payroll tax and getting rid of the child care tax credit to make all the dollars make sense. And then the House side is the revenue source is going to be a mix of corporate and income tax, and they want to keep the child care tax credit in place. So some of stuffing these different versions of the bills and different bills, I think, is also kind of jockeying for position on that piece of it. And then what's also complicates all of it is kind of where we are procedurally in all these different bills. And so this is where I get like a little fuzzier, but you know, you have to have like rule suspensions, and you know, S56 is obviously further behind at this point than now this workers' comp bill is. So again, it's kind of hard to know whether they're moving this because of the funding or because
that's curious because one's an S and one is an H, and so if that's maybe the reason there are two.
Yep.
It is the funding. Okay.
Yep.
Hadn't thought of that. Thanks.
All set to keep going?
You are.
Okay. H165, the Universal School Meals Bill, that passed out of the Senate with a $29 million appropriation out of the Education Fund, and the House concurred with the Senate's proposal of amendment, which was to include that $29 million appropriation. That happened today. So that is moving. And then lastly, H492 is the yield bill. It will set the yield and tax rates for 2024. I think we outlined these. I'll go through quickly. Property dollar equivalent yield is 15,443. Income dollar equivalent yield 17,537. And tax rate for non-homestead property is 1.391. Today, the House concurred with the Senate's proposal of amendment, which was to reduce the reserve in the Ed Fund from 22 million to 13 million to offset education property taxes in FY25. So that bill is also moving. And those are my three. I see one hand.
Michael Inners, go ahead.
Yeah, on the funding for the school lunch program, we just were presented with a take it or leave it contract, which increased our lunch cost by 50%, 48 actually, and some change, 48 point something. So don't want to be accused of exaggerating, per lunch next year. Are other districts encountering those sorts of changes with the universal school lunch program coming down the pike? And will the funding be sufficient if that's happening?
Good questions that I don't know the answers to. I know that the department at the Agency of Education that's monitoring this, Rosie Kruger, has done a lot of research. So hopefully she's getting the information, but it might not hurt to reach out and make sure she's aware.
Okay, could you send me the contact info?
Sure.
Because it was quite a shock when they were told they wouldn't renew without this increase. Then we would have no lunch service starting this summer. So
Dan MacArthur, go ahead.
Yeah, so I can't remember what our yield currently is, but it seems to me those two numbers that you just mentioned are considerably higher than the one for the current fiscal year. But does anybody remember those actual numbers? I seem to have forgotten.
I have them. So property dollar equivalent yield FY23 was 13,314. Now it'll be 15,443. Income dollar equivalent yield in FY23 was 15,948. Now it will be 17,537. And then the tax rate for non-homestead property FY23 was 1.466. This one actually goes down 1.391.
Yeah, okay, that's great. Thank you. I appreciate that, Sandra.
Sure.
Thanks. And Sue dropped it in the chat as well too for folks that didn't write it down quick enough. Jim Salzgiver, go ahead.
Yeah, first I think those numbers are pretty close to the ones that we kind of put in our annual reports, because that's what we were working on back then. So I think they're pretty close to those levels, which is a positive. And to tell you the truth, I forgot my other question. So if I think of it, maybe I'll come back.
Okay. Anyone else with any questions for Sandra on this one? Did you have more, Sandra?
That's it for me.
Okay. Then I guess we're going to go over to Kara.
Yes, last but not least, the budget bill and a few other items. So the budget bill is still in conference committee, so it is very much at play. And I will definitely highlight a few areas in particular that are probably changing as we speak. But I'm just going to give you some highlights. Obviously, it's a huge bill, so I'm going to focus not only on pre-K through 12 education, but kind of the stuff I think you're most interested in. So general kind of education funding includes Ed Fund grants for the expansion of summer and after school programs, with an emphasis on increasing access in underserved areas of the state. The revenue source for this will be sales and use tax money collected from cannabis sales. The bill also includes a $200,000 appropriation for a newly formed school construction aid task force. And then later in the bill, they kind of work through the particulars of that task force, including membership, powers and duties, when they'll meet, reporting requirements. So that's all worked out in the budget bill. Right now, the budget bill addresses PCB remediation and removal by providing, and this is all potentially providing up to 100% coverage of a school's remediation or removal costs, including relocation costs. Originally, schools were only reimbursed for 80% of those costs. So schools that have been reimbursed will, at that rate, will be made whole. There's also a line item for the Burlington School District that will reimburse them for up to $16 million of their actual costs. And then another thing that's potentially in play is an extension of the timeline for completing testing of schools. I know that we had talked to you at the last meeting about a pause to the BCB testing program. That was in a bill that stalled out in Senate Education. That was intentionally stalled out in Senate Education because that Senate leadership did not want to pause the program. So now discussions about a new timeline to accommodate some of the concerns schools have been raising is now playing out in the budget process. So we will continue to keep an eye on that and update everybody in the final report. Let's see. So another thing that's in the report, or in the budget bill, which we expect to stay in the bill, is a moratorium on State Board of Education approval of new approved independent schools. And then there is some money that's reallocated for the Vermont State Teachers Retirement System. And then there is money appropriated towards various grant programs focusing on workforce development, diversity, and those issues. So I see a few hands. And before I move on to the next bill.
Yeah, Jim, go ahead.
Yeah, Kara, I was just curious, on the, so setting aside $200,000 to do a study about school construction, I was under the impression that the AOE has been doing a study just like that that's due shortly to be delivered.
So
is the legislature aware of that?
Yes, so you are correct. And actually, this committee will use that report to inform their work. So this is a committee that's going to look really into how we're going to aid schools, how are schools going to finance these projects, prioritizing projects, kind of, they're going to take this report from the Agency of Education that's going to give us like a big picture of all the work that needs to be done in the state. And then the School Construction Aid Task Force is really going to help to drill down on how are we going to tackle this massive problem.
Gaston, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. So I was going to wait until you talked about H486, which is about the PCBs, but my question is this, that, I mean, good for Burlington High School that they're getting 16 million. What I'm very concerned about is that there are schools throughout the state who are early identified. There are a couple of schools up here in our SU. And when you read through H486, it just seems that there is a got you here, and that's at the very end of 486 when it says that they're going to, the AOE will identify stakeholders, and together they're going to identify criteria and all of this. And to me, that just signals that we're not there yet, that that's a place where we can sort of couch, we're not going to give you X dollars, whereas, Burlington High School gets 16 million and they don't get to play in that. I mean, it's just to me wrong on so many levels. Over.
Well, I guess I have two responses to that. So one, you're not alone. There's definitely been lively discussion over at the State House, really over the course of a couple of months since that appropriation showed up in H486 and more recently in the budget bill discussions. So you're not alone. And then my second response is just to H486. That bill is still on the wall in Senate Education. So for purposes of our discussion here tonight, focusing on bills that are advancing in the legislative process, that bill has not been included because the main components of that bill are now showing up in the budget bill.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions on the budget bill? Okay. So school safety, I know that Interim Secretary Boucher discussed that as a priority of the governor and by extension, her agency. And that is true. They have been working really hard all session to get this bill to the finish line, and it has not been easy. The bill requires 4 things, and the first 3 things were kind of, I guess, easier to agree to. And those are adopting a policy mandating biannual options-based response drills. Schools must adopt all hazards emergency operations plans and adopt an access control and visitor management policy. And the bill actually, obviously goes into greater detail, but kind of high level, that's what's going to be expected of schools out of this bill. A lot of schools are already doing this work. So it just, this area didn't require as much thought and consideration. But the 4th component of the bill are these behavioral threat assessment teams, which are currently used by many schools and by some considered best practice. This area has been an area of a lot of focus and work. And because of that, we're not 100% sure this bill will make it across the finish line. Advocates from the Disability Law Project and others have raised concerns about this part of the bill. And as I said, that prompted additional work with the Agency of Education and Vermont Superintendents Association to develop language that allows schools to assess and appropriately respond to potential reported threats to school communities without contributing to increased school exclusion or unnecessary referrals of students to the criminal justice and school discipline systems that disproportionately impact students from historically marginalized backgrounds. In the end, the law tasks the Secretary of Education in consultation with the Commissioner of DCF, Vermont School Boards Association, and Vermont Legal Aid Disability Law Project with developing model behavioral threat assessment team policies and procedures, which schools would be required to adopt. The bill would also require schools to ensure that behavioral threat assessment team members receive annual training as well as bias trainings. And the bill would add a lot of data reporting and collection requirements to ensure proper use of these teams. Like I said, the bill is still very much in flux. And then, as Sue had mentioned, the Senate Education Committee today considered yet another amendment, which would establish a working group, like Sue had mentioned, on student protections from harassment and discrimination in schools. So this is a bill that we are closely monitoring, and stay tuned. Any questions on?
Questions for Kara? Yeah, Mark Schauber, go ahead.
Actually, not for Kara, sorry. I wanted to go back to S103 for a moment. I didn't want to speak at the time because we were waiting for Secretary Boucher to come in. I just wanted to say there's an aspect to the concept of what they're calling lowering the harassment standard that I think we need to be really careful about, which is opening up our schools to liability, even more than we are already opened up to. And I know that there are a couple of legislators that are really keen on getting this or parts of it into some bill this year, and keep trying to sneak it in. And I really worry. First of all, severe pervasive isn't in Title 16, as Secretary Boucher said. So there's that. Then there's the whole employee versus a student issue. But if we don't have the proper resources for our schools to manage these situations and the increase in the number of investigations that they're going to have to go through, if the language from S103, which has been taken out, goes through, I think we are going to end up in a situation where harassment and thus bullying become even worse and really open up our schools to severe liability problems. So I really worry about that.
Thank you, Mark. Jim, go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up on that and kind of to Sue. I'm curious as to, you know, something like that, I would think VSBA would be very interested in. Are they are they involved with any of this stuff? And I would think they would be one of our best sources for, you know, an expert opinion on the impact of some of these changes.
Yeah, so I meet weekly with VSBA. We meet every Tuesday morning, and I did get them involved early on. They provided written and oral testimony to all three committees that have been considering this language. Heather Lynn provided the testimony, so they are working very closely with us on this.
Michael Inners, go ahead.
Yeah, I think there's some counterproductive aspects of it also. I mean, by turning everything into a formal, you know, investigation and all that goes along with that, you know, especially at younger ages, the opportunity to you know, do a little bit of teaching moment with things goes away, right? It makes everything into a formal, you know, major case. So that's a concern I have.
Yep. Thanks for sharing. Any other comments, questions on our legislative update?
I just have two quick additional bills,
Oh
and I will
my
be very,
God. Oh
very
my
quick
God.
on these.
What is
Okay.
it? It's like it's the end of the session or something here.
Exactly. Oh my goodness. Okay, so H481 is an act relating to public health initiatives to address death by suicide. That bill proposes new duties and responsibilities of the Director of Suicide Prevention, including tasking the director with a model protocol for all schools regarding suicide prevention, training, education, and postvention services. The model protocol must reflect preliminary data related to grants to expand mental health and well-being services to youth, pursuant to a law that was passed last session. And then this part was added on the Senate side. The model protocol must ensure that school employees receive education pertaining to the prevention of use of language regarding and identification of eating disorders in youth. The House today concurred on the Senate amendment, so the bill is likely to go to the governor once whoever organizes all of that, all of those bills to be sent to the governor gets that done. So it has gone through both chambers. And then last but not least is the miscellaneous education bill. There is only one miscellaneous education bill remaining, and that bill suspends the implementation of the shared school district financial system. It allows the National Guard tuition benefit to be used at non-Vermont approved post-secondary schools, makes changes to the home study program, extends the recommendation and reporting requirement deadlines for the Act One working group, and also creates a technical advisory group, which is a subset of that group that will stay on after the Act One working group sunsets to provide ongoing assistance. And then finally, the bill makes changes to the signature requirement for candidates running for school boards of a unified union school district, a union school district, and a union elementary school district. It will change the signature requirement from 60 to 30 signatures. But this is a policy decision and one that the House Education Committee is currently discussing. So we're not sure if that's going to stay in the bill or come out. And that concludes our update.
All right.
I think
Mark
Mark.
Schauber.
If I could give a quick update to your update, Kara, on the signature aspect of things. The Senate today passed a floor amendment that changes it from 30 or 1% to 60 or 1%. And so that's going through to the House. My understanding from conversations that I've had with the chair of House Ed is that they were more or less leaning towards going with the 30 and 1%. I don't know what the 60 and 1% is going to do to that discussion at this point.
Thank you, Mark, very much.
Any other legislative update questions? No. All right. And then understand, gang, by the next time that we get together, all of this will be settled. All right. And then we'll be talking about a veto session. So, all right. Huge thank you to staff for staying on top of all of this stuff, especially on an hour by hour basis. It really matters at the end of the session. So we greatly appreciate the work that you all are doing for us. Thank you. I am now going to turn it over. I believe like even the next 3 items, I'm going to go grab a beer, maybe grab some dinner. I'm going to turn things over to Jim Salzgiver, and he's going to take you through the rest of it.
You're basically wanting to avoid having to listen to any of this. Okay, that's
I am
good to
only
know.
joking. I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying right here.
Yeah, I that's a bunch on there. Anyway, okay. The first item is the budget, and to kind of remind people of the process. We've got some good people. Sue and Carrie first got together, put together the basic budget, did a great job. Then pulled me into it to do the first the first sort of back and forth process. Then we have our finance committee, which includes Nancy Russell, Mark Schauber, and Michael Inners, who then took what Sue, Carrie, and I had agreed on and gave it another hard look and discussion, which was very helpful. And so what you guys get in front of you at this point is what's come out of that process. And as a reminder, once this board agrees, approves a budget that's presented to the full membership at the annual meeting. So just to kind of, that is the budget process. But so tonight, what we're really looking for is is an opportunity to discuss budget items, give you a quick overview, and see whether the board is comfy with the budget where it is, or as it's presented. I not a lot. There are some big things that changed in the budget for this year. Most of the items in the budget are not dramatic changes, so I won't go through line by line. Just kind of point out a few things. One, the annual conference. It's nice to be back in person. It's also nice because the annual conference is actually a profitable venture for the VSBA, so it helps support our overall programming. So we're back to that point with looking at basically a 14,000 profit for the roughly for the annual conference in the coming year. Other items that are a little harder to actually predict are board development and VSBA searches. Board development has been extremely busy in recent times. You'll see that through the results for the past in recent times. It's been very busy. It kind of, we ran into issues of capacity with some of our personnel changes, Phil Gore and things like that. The budget for 24 is kind of presenting a bit of a slowdown, not to the point, we expect that board services, board development services will continue to be in demand, but maybe not, in a way. I kind of think hopefully they won't have to be quite, considering some of the jobs that were being done hopefully they won't be in as much demand when it's, board conflict resolution and stuff. VSBA searches, we're just we take a stab at how many searches we expect, and that's largely outsourced at this point. The interest income figure in here will kind of hit on something a little bit later. We conservatively put the interest income figure in here. We have an expectation that some changes we're making could actually create a positive variance on that in the coming year. Suzanne, you had some? No? Thought I saw your hand. Okay.
No, sorry.
The big changes for the year is, as everybody's aware, we've been marveling at how 4 people can get so much work done at the VSBA for all these years. So, the big change for the year is actually the shift to a 5-person staff. That is, the truth is for fiscal 23, we actually came in slightly under budget. There were a whole lot of changes going on, but for fiscal 24, we're talking about our total compensation made up of benefits and salaries and things like that, talking about an increase of about 16% over $100,000, which is pretty significant on our budget. But that's what happens when you increase your staff count by 25%. It has an impact. So, I think we all agreed, we voted that it made great sense to do that and to fit it into the budget. But what that leads us to is the topic that the Finance Committee spent the most time discussing in our meeting, which is dues. So dues, you'll see in the budget. I think the Finance Committee tried to take an approach of thinking about this in a multi-year time frame. That we have a significant increase in our budgeted expenditures next year and going forward, and we want to have as smooth of a progression of dues as possible. A couple of years ago when we talked about bringing on another staff person, I was like, wow, that's got to have a huge impact on dues. But I think where we are right now is we proposed a 5% increase in dues, which I think puts us in a good position to sort of accommodate, to kind of smooth things forward as we go to a 5-person VSBA. There's actually one other item that I want to kind of tie together with the dues, which you'll notice that in fiscal 24, one of the items that everybody probably scratched their head and said, what does that mean? On the income side is an item called carried forward, which is $85,800. That is essentially, if you look at that is really carried forward. We had a surplus last year. That's using that surplus from last year to create a break-even 2024. As all of us know from our school budgets, you can't count on a surplus being there to help you out in the following year. So we have essentially we do have to recognize that we're using a surplus for a break even. That's actually one reason why we, in the discussion in the Finance Committee, it was like, could we provide a less than a 5% increase in dues? We kind of realized that again, the 5-person, the fact that we're using a surplus for next year, we really need to, in order to prepare us, because this is the 24 budget, we've got to be thinking about the 25 budget as well. And so, the thought is we really need to have, having a less than 5% increase in the dues really would seem, to me anyway, I made the argument that would not be very prudent. So that's where we came out with the 5% increase. I'm going to throw one other thing at you before asking for questions, and hopefully there'll be some questions. We in the bylaws last year, we made an amendment that said that, you know, we historically it had said we didn't increase dues any more than education spending went up every year. And last year we made a change to say, okay, we're not going to limit ourselves. This year that would have been fine because education spending is up about 8%. We're talking about a 5% increase in dues. But we thought it made a lot more sense to not, because, you know, we've had years where it's 1%, and that would have created a significant issue. What we said is we'd move to, we have a goal of having our dues not increase faster than education spending over time. And at each annual meeting, we present, here's the increase in education spending over the last 3 years. Here's the increase in our dues over the last 3 years, just to show people a comparison. So for this year, we actually, the 5% increase puts us a little bit above the education spending. Over the past 3 years, the annual growth, if you just look at it as an annual growth rate, the annual growth rate in education spending has been 4.75%. Our dues with a 5% increase will have grown at a 5.6%. So, you know, less than 1% more, but, you know, but more. But again, considering the change in personnel, I think that's actually a pretty good outcome. So I'll open it to questions.
Gaston, go ahead.
Yeah, so Jim, what I'm wondering is, do you budget to the total number, or is it to expense account? So, you know, like in a school, we have the ability to move things around based on need, and we're budgeting to that total number, although we break it up by expense account. Do we have that ability with the VSBA, Over?
I think, you know, we have the ability to try to adjust, you know, honestly, when I look at these numbers, things like, you know, I look at board development is another profit center, essentially. You know, we have certain elements, you know, and we've talked about over the years, there are some services we used to charge for, we now give for free, but there are others that we look at as, gee, if we could actually generate more activity, then we could help our budget. So I think you know, I look at it as we sort of have a portfolio of business here, and we can always look at, you know, we could try to get more out of our consulting work, essentially, you know, if needed. And my guess is that, you know, that in future years that actually is going to be a great opportunity, because, you know, that's the beauty of, you know, VSBA being there for school districts to do the board development work, being there to do the VSBA, you know, the superintendent searches. Those are some of the most important, you know, services you can provide. And so I think that, you know, just, and honestly, I did a VSBA search or superintendent search through the VSBA, and I tried to price out other providers, and it's also one of the greatest deals you can get. So, you know, it's a win-win. And I think that, you know, I would kind of, you know, urge, and I think Sue's, you know, thoughts are pretty consistent with, you know, taking the opportunity to the extent that, you know, we've got really good people, to the extent that we can use those people to actually take some of the pressure off of our budget, and help school districts at the same time. It's a win-win. So I kind of look at it that way. Hopefully that answers.
The other thing I would add is we're seeing a lot more interest in our superintendent evaluation service.
Right.
And I think that's great. And I think we're going to see even more as these governance standards go into effect, because I think boards are going to, you know, have to pay attention to those governance standards we talk about. evaluating their superintendent.
And now with slightly more resources in the organization, yeah, I think we continue. I think it makes all the sense in the world for us to continue to outsource, some of that as well, but hopefully make a little bit of a profit on the outsourcing too when we bring third parties in to do the consulting work. Colleen.
Yeah, thank you, Jim, so much for your work on this. I really value your expertise on this. It's just kind of a comment for all of us. And actually the last couple of comments are perfect segue into just what I wanted to put out there for something to us to think about. I heard, Jim, in some of your presentation, a defensiveness about the dues and trying to rationalize, why raising it in a certain amount and connecting it to ed spending and so forth. And I would love for us to kind of flip that around to, well, what's the value added measures that we have here, the value added to that, expanding the staff. And I know that when I'm listening to our legislative updates, for example, I'm just astounded at the expertise that we have in the room of, our staff. And how do we get that word out about, you talked about consulting, maybe leveraging that a little bit more, or, the superintendent evaluations, whatever those pieces are. I think there's an opportunity to make this a positive, not a defensive mode of, we need this. How do we get this out there, that the value that the VSBA staffing provides to the entire state and all the boards, and what are the opportunities there? I don't really have a question. It's more of a comment, but
No, but it's
you.
a really good one. And I think, Sue can speak to that better than I can, but at the same time, from my perspective, every time the VSBA does work for a district, whether it's, search, whether it's superintendent evaluation, whether it's, board development, almost always those school districts are like, wow, this is great. So, the more we do that around the state, then that certainly, cements in people's minds the value of the VSBA. But Sue, do you?
No, I think that's very true, Jim. And it also helps us build the relationships with the various board members, which, as you know, are turning over every year. So we need to continually be doing that.
Yeah.
So Jim, as we go through to these, we've got a couple other hands up. I just want board members to just do a quick check here. I want you to look at your clock, and then I want you to look at the agenda. Okay.
The other items I have will be pretty quick, I think.
Okay, Mark Cluff, go ahead.
I just want to say, I think we provide a lot of value, and knowing how the staff operates now from being on the board, we're not lavish. So I don't think there should be any apologizing about the rate increases. We have to watch how far it does get in increases in the future, but good hard work. My second comment is, I understand the path of least resistance is to send this money over to Vanguard, but I think we should consider Vermont taxpayers and money leaving the state and that sort of thing. We've got a lot of great wealth management firms in Vermont, and I think we should consider keeping it in state if that's a possibility. I got my economic development hat on from all those other boards I'm on,
I like that comment, but I'll address that in a minute when we get to that Vanguard item.
Jim, do you need a motion for the budget?
I think we do.
Would somebody be so inclined to make a motion to approve the proposed budget for
Mark Clough would move that budget that Jim has presented.
That's the most interest I've gotten in a motion in a long time. Mark Clough with the motion to approve the FY24 budget. Suzanne Puck with the second. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Leave it up so we can get a look at it. Okay. That is near unanimous. I'm not seeing anything from Diane, so, but the motion does pass.
Thank you.
Jim, you want to move
Okay,
on?
the next item is actually, this should be a pretty simple one. The restricted net asset reserves fund. Almost any organization tries to make sure that they hold those funds. It's not that you can't ever use them, but you only expect to ever use them in a real emergency. And you want to ensure that you hold those, and it has to be a big deal to actually use those funds, because bad things can happen. We could end up, it's when folks wanted to start up a competing VSBA, and we could have lost a lot of members. Okay, to continue, you've got to be prudent and have the financial capacity to survive when the unexpected happens. We've set that as a policy in our bylaws as the expectation that we have between 4 and 6 months worth of expenditures in our restricted net asset reserve fund. We are under that now. As I noted, I think, did we? Yeah, the note was in there. The actual level would be 360 to 507 or something like that. The finance committee decided, we're right now at 270,000 in the restricted fund. Finance committee said we have plenty of capacity right now to bump that up to 425. It's kind of pushing it if we went further. And the finance committee just said, we think it makes sense to make this 425, puts us about in the middle of that range. And then the finance committee will review this on an annual basis and make a recommendation on an annual basis whether it should change or not. So the proposal is essentially to increase from our current 270, which is less than 4 months, to 425,000, the restricted reserve. It's not going to impact our ability to operate, and those reserve funds are always there for us to use when we need them. But that puts us into the sort of middle of the 4 to 6 month range. So happy to take any questions on that. It's Gaston.
Yeah, sorry. So where does that extra money come from? Is this money that we have in savings or that we've got invested and you just pull it out, or what?
It's right now we if you look at the balance sheet, you'll see that we've got our restricted funds, then our other equity funds, then actually what is net income funds. Those are all essentially the equity of the organization. And we're just taking some that aren't restricted now and restricting them. So it's, we have adequate funds to do it with basically no impact on the organization. And we're not using all of our extra funds to put into the restricted. But with an increase from 270 to 425, that's a pretty big bump. I think it puts us in a good place. But we have the funds to do it right now, which is one of the reasons you want to make sure you do it when you clearly have the funds available.
Great, thanks, Jim. So with that, I'll make that motion, Neil.
Luckily, Gaston, I just dropped some suggested language in the chat.
Yeah, actually, I had it in the memo that was included in the package, I think.
Yep, I just copy and pasted it.
Oh, thank you.
From the motion that you made at the meeting. Yeah.
Okay.
So you want me to repeat that?
Please, Gaston.
Okay, so I'll make a motion that we approve an increase to the restricted net assets reserve fund from 270,000 to 425,000, which is within the 4 to 6 month operating expenses guideline set in VSBA policy A.6. Over.
I'll second it.
Seconded by Suzanne. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor, raise your hand. Keep them up, please. I see unanimous this time. Thank you, Board.
Okay. So the next item is what to do with those funds. And essentially, we had approved back in September that we could start investing in different types of accounts. Essentially on a conservative basis, just using index funds. At this point, back when we started talking about doing this 2 years ago, and back when we first discussed it, or even a year ago, interest rates were pretty close to zero. Carrie has been doing yeoman's work to get us some return on those funds, and you'll see in the budget we show $700. We can rather dramatically increase those returns, even just going into a government money market fund at this point. And to take on Mark's point, the basic reason we had used some local and firms in the past. The problem is, Carrie can tell you too, she did the legwork of, when you look at the fees that are charged from some of the other firms we could use, who are more, usually they're national firms, but they have ties locally. The fee structure is the basic reason why we end up going with a Vanguard, because generally, if you use a firm like that, then you're going to end up paying in total fees anywhere from 0.75% or 1% of fees of the amount that you're investing to the organization. And here we're talking about more like, ending up having, 0.5% instead of, so it's 5 basis points instead of 75 basis points in cost. It's a dramatic difference, which is the reason, you can use, Vanguard, Schwab, Fidelity, whatever. We just kind of picked Vanguard, but, we honestly looked at, and, Carrie could tell you more, but, looked at the possibility of trying to use some of the firms we've used in the past, but it's just, it is so uncompetitive from a total cost standpoint. Carrie, you want to mention?
You're testing my memory because I did this a little while ago, but I know that we spoke with Edward Jones, which is who does our retirement for our association. Out of the one I talked to was out of Randolph, and the difference was substantial in the costs that were involved. The annual costs, that was substantial, and I can't remember what the numbers were, but it was substantially different.
Yeah, that what I've seen in the past is, if we aim for with a Vanguard doing with a money market fund like this, it's going to tend to be like 9 basis. People don't like to talk basis points, but that's basis points. 0.9% or whatever, 0.9 of 1%. Anyway, 100 basis points is 1%, and the cost for doing this ends up, just for the money market fund, is one of the more expensive ones at 9 basis points. If we end up moving into, the finance committee is going to get together and discuss, we had provided a proposed, with what is actually a procedure, which includes, plans for, some like an S&P 500 index and a bond index and stuff like that. We're going to have another meeting with the finance committee and kick that around again. But just moving to a blended portfolio like that ends up being somewhere in the territory of actually just like 5 basis points for the whole thing. And that's the problem when we go to an Edward Jones. I think we're probably talking about, we are going to be talking about more like 70 basis points in costs. So it's too big of a gulf. So what at this point, what we're looking for is we essentially, the board had decided in the past that we could do this, but we don't have the account open right now. So we need the approval to open the account. The finance committee said Vanguard's a good place to do it. So we have the documentation all to start that process. So that's what is being proposed that we open the account, and initially we'd be looking at shifting our restricted net asset reserve into a government money market fund, which is 100% U.S. government risk. Mark.
I just want to say one thing in regards to the question that Mark said, and then I was going to give you the motion. We're not looking for a money manager. And I think if we were, that would be a very different situation, but it's the finance committee that's going to be making these decisions. So I think going with the lowest fee is being the most prudent with our money, or the taxpayers' money, wherever it's coming from. So that's my personal opinion, and I think the finance committee pretty much held that. So anyway, I will make a motion that we approve the VSBA executive director or any VSBA employee authorized by the executive director to open an account at Vanguard for investment of funds by the VSBA. This motion includes authority to sign the certification and indemnification statement similar to that provided to the VSBA board at its May 10th, 2023 meeting.
I'll second that.
Seconded by Tara. Is there any further discussion, board?
Could you please drop that into the chat?
It's in the
did
packet,
you already?
Terry.
You just did.
It's in the
It's in the packet.
It's in the packet.
Yep.
Okay.
Michael Inners, go ahead.
I just had one question about the forms. There's a section on options trading.
Not going to do that.
Yeah, I was going to say.
This is strictly what I think the finance committee wants to do. What I certainly would want to do is it's strictly index funds, government money market. It's like I wouldn't want anybody at the VSBA having the ability to buy individual stocks or to do anything like options. Forget it. It's as simple as possible.
Yeah, because you can lose 100% of your investment on an option trading or more.
Now, options usually require additional documentation. We're not going to do that.
All right. Any further discussion on the motion, board? Seeing none. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Leave it up.
Sorry, I was asking about the motion and I didn't notice who the second was. Can you tell me?
The second was Tara Sweet.
Thank you.
Yep. And Adrian, are you in favor? Yes. Okay, I got everybody except Dan MacArthur, so not quite unanimous, but I can't see Dan because his camera's off. Yeah, but
Do we still have a few questions out?
So I am gonna, well, I'm hoping those hands were the voting, so I'm gonna call that unanimous unless Mark Kaufman, did you have a question?
Sorry, my tech misread my raised hand and put it into the command structure to raise my hand. I'm all good.
That is okay. Perfect. Glad to hear it. All right, so that passes as well.
Thank you.
And does that include all of our finance related items for the evening?
Yep.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Except for the signature, changing the signers. Do you want to do that now?
I might actually, I'm going to keep that at the end, Carrie, and I might actually punt that to June because we are already currently over time on this meeting. But I do want to move on to appointment of resolutions committee. So board members, I hope that you are aware that this was coming, that you had a chance to make arrangements with your other regional rep as to which one of you is going to serve on the committee, because I am looking for those names this evening. So why don't you raise your hand and tell me which one of the two regional reps decided to serve on the, okay, I got Mark Kaufman. I have Dan MacArthur.
No, I'm actually nominating Mark Schauber from our region. So
ouch.
I'm saying it's him, not me.
Neil, could I ask for, could we just go by region? And then
Yes.
just so that there's no confusion. So do you mind if I had written all the names. So if you could just.
Take it over. Take it. Do you have
Okay.
the list of regions? Yeah, go ahead. Flora.
I have the list of regions and I had sort of known who was, is that okay?
Yep, please.
Okay. So I'm just gonna, the central region, because I chair the committee, is taken. So Bart actually already left. So I had that one first. So Addison, Suzanne, or Mark? Suzanne, okay. So I'm just circling you. Bennington, David or Jim?
We're having a quick little discussion here on the side.
Okay,
David, you or me?
quick.
I guess I will.
Okay, so
Thank
Jim.
you, Jim. You're so generous.
Eastern Chittenden, Diane or Colleen?
Colleen, if you don't want to do it, I'll do it, but I did legislative, so I thought maybe you'd want to do it.
Sure, you can put me down, and if Diane wants to take it on, we'll figure it out, but we'll start with me.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, Franklin and Grand Isle, I had written you, Tara, because there's.
I think Mark's gonna do it.
Oh, Mike, oh, sorry. Okay, Mike, where is Mike?
Mike, yeah, Mike.
Mike.
Inners, yeah.
Oh, Mike Inners. Okay, sorry, Mike. Okay, Mike. It was just your picture was missing there. So Kingdom North?
That would be me.
Okay, Gaston, yeah, you were the only one there. Kingdom South? Mark? Who's doing Kingdom South? Mark Cloud? Am I missing something? No.
Mark Kaufman signed up for that.
Okay.
Mark Kaufman. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So Rutland region. Adrian,
I don't know if my other half is here. I don't think so. So I think I lucked out.
yeah, so can you do it?
I can,
Our hope
yeah,
is to
that's fine.
just have
Yep.
the people that are here so
Yep.
that there's no confusion.
Yep, no, it's fine. I'll be happy to.
And then Western Chittenden is complicated because we just have, I don't know if Martine will have the time. Right?
The legislative session is ending, so we'll have more
So
time.
we have another time, in June, we're hoping to finalize that. So we'll check on that one.
Laura, can you tell me who?
Yes, sorry.
Can you tell me who with the Central Vermont region was? Is that you?
Yeah, because it's
Okay. Sorry.
no, that's okay. It's just because the vice president chairs it, not because I not let Bart do it. Okay, now I'm confused where I was. Wyndham, right? Yeah. So
That's
Mark.
Mark Schauber.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. And Windsor.
Yeah, it'll have to be Nancy because we don't have another.
Nancy, yeah. Okay, that's what I had written, but let's make sure that she confirms at our next meeting. Thank you, Neil. Sorry for taking over that.
Nope, that is okay. That was way more efficient.
Thanks.
All right. We have a resolutions committee, then be on the lookout. I think Flora will be reaching out for scheduling a meeting. Moving on then to report and recommendation of the
Neil?
awards committee, but somebody's got a hand up. Yeah.
It's Mark Schauber. Just a quick resolutions question. When does the online form go online for
It should be online now.
It's been online for quite a while.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's active through
until
June 15th. Yep.
Thank you.
All right. Now we're going to move on to recommendation from the awards committee. So folks, in the packet, you saw the minutes from the awards committee meeting, but I do want to turn it over if I can get a rep from that committee to maybe just read out and explain a little bit of what we're looking for. Go ahead, Mark.
So Martine was still on the floor, so she asked me to report out for her. So for the Stafford Bell, the committee wants to do basically a two-step process. One, to change the criteria so that it does not require what the candidate doesn't have to be, scratch that, to take out the requirement that you are not an active board member. So it's somebody who is a current board member could be nominated and receive it. And the primary reason for that is that the committee is recommending that we give the award to Don, who currently is still an active board member. Any questions? There are a couple of
Yeah, so why don't we pause on that one and I'll go ahead to questions. So Dan MacArthur, go ahead.
Yeah, I would like to make the motion that we remove the criteria that a person cannot be a school board member in order to receive this award.
Okay, is there a second?
Neil, I'll second that. It's Gaston.
Okay, is there some discussion? Michael Inners. You're muted, Michael.
All right. Do we want to make this a permanent change or a one-time only change for this cycle?
I personally was hoping that this would be just a one cycle change, but I don't know that the committee necessarily discussed that aspect of it.
Is
go
Nancy
ahead.
here?
She
Nancy
was
here?
earlier, and I think she had to leave.
Okay, I think that the general and Carrie, maybe you remember the general consensus was that we didn't feel that that criteria was important, that it could be lifted permanently, but
That's the feeling that I had from the committee, was that there's no reason why we should exclude a board member from the, you know, there's no, none of you could come up with a reason why we should exclude a current board member.
and board members do, there are definitely board members, and Don's a good example, that remain board members well into, I'm not going to say the words out loud, but you know what I'm trying to say.
Adrian, I saw you had your hand up.
I did. I was just going to say, because I was there for that discussion, I don't remember us specifically saying whether we were going to suggest that it be taken out forever. But I agree that we couldn't really see a reason why it had to be a criteria. So I would support it being taken out.
Okay. Floor, go ahead.
So I just, it's that process question. I feel it's a little just, we were just having this issue in one of our policies at school. Like, it's a little weird to already know who's going to get it and adapt the policy, the award so that that person can get it. I'm totally fine, but I just want to make sure that the optics of like I don't know how to express it, like you want that person to have it with all of the, and the person deserves it. So it's hard to have that conversation separate, and it's not clean. It's not the best optics. I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. Adrian, I see your hand back up. You're muted though.
Yeah, I was trying to unmute, sorry. I don't know if we have to tie it so completely. I think there was a conversation that, wow, that really makes that award hard to award, because so many times the people that you would want to award it to are not people that retire from this board. They just keep serving, and they are very long-term on that, and you'd like them to be able to get the award while they're around and while they can appreciate it and while, you know, we all remember them. And so I think it was just somewhat of a coincidence. And I do hear you, Flora, that, you know, that maybe it wasn't the greatest thing, but his name came up, and there was also conversation at sort of the same time saying, gee, is that a necessary criteria, and it would allow us to do this, you know. So I don't know if it's a absolute if then.
Thanks. Colleen, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to tag on to what Flora just said. A few years ago, I really wanted to nominate somebody, or I don't know, a year ago, 2 years ago, relatively recently, for this particular award. I just thought, wow, you know, this person was so deserving. And I reached out to whomever and said, well, what are the criteria? How do you do this? And so forth. And there was no clear criteria. I asked for a list of who had received the award over the past whatever recently, and it was sporadic. It wasn't something that happened every year. And so this question went to this particular committee, which is, I think, a great idea. How do you establish what are the criteria, and who is that widely known? Do board members around the state know what this award is, and that we're seeking nominations for this particular award? We know about, you know, the school board awards and so forth, but there was no publicized criteria. And I'm not dissing the particular nominee at this point. However, I do agree with Flora's perspective that the optics are a little bit odd, that the award is now being crafted to fit whoever is being selected. And I just wonder if there's another pathway. One, establish clear criteria for whatever that award is and publicize it next year. And two, if you really, you know, if we want to honor Don, let's just do that as the VSBA board. Don't tag it onto a particular name of an award whose criteria are extremely fuzzy. And a couple years ago, nobody could tell me anything about it. So I just, you know, any time that there's an opening to say that the VSBA board operates a little bit shady, I think this is, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way at all, but it's not clear that this is an award. We're seeking nominations. There are lots of worthy people in the state. And if we want to honor Don, of course, the VSBA has the complete authority to do a one-timer. So anyway, I think that it's all good. You know, it's all good to honor people, but let's think about the future. How do you publicize what this award is, and how do you seek nominations?
Thanks, Colleen. Before I go to, I see Jim's got his hand up. Sue, can I ask you a question? Because of our running over on time here, I'm beginning to lose some board members. At some point, will I lose my quorum?
Well, at some point you will.
Can you let me know if that some point would happen if one more person leaves? Because I do have a person that needs to go.
Okay, let me see here. Yeah,
Okay.
I will.
And
I'll count.
while
Right.
while you're doing that, let me go to Jim Salzgiver.
Yeah, quick question. I went to the VSBA website. Under awards, there isn't anything. And so, and I was just kind of thinking, who the heck was Stafford Bell? And how was this created? And is there a reason why it was defined the way it is? And, not that those things are set in cement, but at the same time, I'm just trying to figure out what I I'm not sure. I don't really understand what the full criteria is for the Stafford Bell Award and why it is, but just be curious as to know.
Thanks, Jim. And just, I want to make sure, Mark Kaufman, I see your hand up and I want to make sure I'm not ignoring you. And if you had a question again, that I get you.
I agree with the statements. Irregardless of the individual, anytime you change how something is awarded so that you can give it to a specific person, it just looks bad and it opens you up to immediate cultural and social criticism of nepotism, favoritism, and disregard of your own processes.
Thank you. Dan MacArthur, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I think taking from the people who were on this awards committee, their general sense that they couldn't figure out why this criteria was ever on a part of the Stafford Bell in the first case. I guess I think that removing it, not for 1 year, but just saying, we're making this go ahead, you go away, so that in the future, a larger number of people might be able to be nominated for the award. Seems to make sense to me. And I don't, perhaps it was done specifically for Don, but I think that what it does is it allows a larger pool of people in the future. And so I would stick with my motion and have it be a permanent change to the way this award is granted.
Okay, Mark Schauber, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say, and I think Carrie has a little bit of history on the award, but in general, we don't know where the criteria came from. But we don't have a history of when the criteria was created, or whether it's from the original award or put in place sometime in later years. So I just wanted to put that out there. We don't actually have a lot of history, Jim, to share with you, although Carrie does have some history on the award itself.
Yes, and can I just say also that the reason why there's nothing on our website under award that I just hid is because this was in flux, so I took it off until this was settled. I didn't want to have people apply for this and of course, the other discussion, which is the exceptional board or exceptional chair. It was kind of in flux, so I took it off so there wouldn't be confusion. But there normally is descriptions on there, and there will be once this is settled.
Okay, Sue, so I did just lose my one additional board member?
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay,
A quorum is 8 members, which has to include at least 2 officers and at least 1 rep from 6 regions. So you're still fine.
okay. So we have a motion on the floor, folks, with a second, and that is to approve a change in the criteria for the Stafford Award to remove that they need to be yeah, this is the same this is the same twist up that Mark Schauber found him in there. We are moving the criteria that the person needs to be a non-seated board member, which is a bit of a negative statement. But
Yeah, I was going to say, I think what he said was, I typed out when he was saying it. Dan MacArthur made a motion to remove their criteria on the Stafford Bell Award that excludes board members from receiving the award.
But he also said to make it permanent. And what I wanted to do was I seconded the initial motion. And so I also will second the amended motion, if you will.
He didn't actually say it. He didn't say that in the motion. That was the discussion afterwards.
Oh, I thought it was.
And just as an FYI, I found that somebody who got the Robert T. Stafford Bell Award in 1999. That was Con Hogan.
yeah. So folks, yes, the motion as it was made was to make a permanent change to the criteria.
Right, and Gaston, just to be clear, I didn't specify permanent, but unless it specified 1 year, then I think that it would have to be considered to be a permanent change.
Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion on the motion before we call the question on this? All right, those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand and leave it up. I'm counting 9, 10. Those opposed. I count 1 or 2. Adrian, were you opposed or?
Sorry, I was a 4.
Oh, you
I
were a
didn't
4.
get my hand
So
up
then
fast enough.
I'm
You
going to
didn't count
go
me.
11 in favor, 1 opposed. All right, so motion passes to change the criteria. Then do we now have a motion for a potential candidate? Or did we want to defer that? Mark, go ahead.
Yep, I will move that, you sent this language earlier. 1 second later. Move to nominate Don Collins for the 2023 Stafford Bell Award. That was simple.
And I second that. Sam MacArthur.
All right, any further discussion? Mark Koenig, go ahead.
Given the concerns we have on optics, would it be worth bumping that nomination till 2024 so that the policy change is in place and then you award it, as opposed to you awarded it and then made a policy change?
Flora, go ahead.
So, and when is the deadline? Even if we wait to our next meeting, right? Like, does this need to happen today? What is the deadline for submitting that award? Because since it was not posted yet, right?
It's not posted yet. Usually the deadline is sometime in early to mid-September, I believe.
So
We don't normally post the Stafford Bell. Usually this is nominated from the board. It's not usually the one that's nominated that you'll talk about later is the exceptional board. That's nominations that's brought in.
Yeah, but what I mean is that we don't need to do it today. We can wait until a little closer to September, right? Like, and it won't make it any, and I know we're recording. I just a little cleaner in my mind, but.
Yep. Adrian, go ahead.
I would definitely agree with that. We have, what, 2 more months before we need to make this decision. We could put a notice out, to our membership saying, hi, are you interested in this award? We're taking nominations, and then we could have it on the agenda in August.
Mark Schauer.
So just 2 things. One, as Carrie said, this is an award that at least historically has come from the board itself, not from all membership. That's the next one that we have on the agenda. When the committee first discussed this now 2 months ago, I think, part of our reasoning for doing the nomination then, which then got put off because we learned about the criteria, was because of we want him to be able to be around and enjoying it, not something that we're waiting till the annual meeting to present him with.
Michael Inners, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of holding open a nomination process when you already know who you're going to choose. So I would suggest that let's just go ahead. If we're going to, if we want to nominate Don Collins, let's nominate Don Collins and just do it. I think he deserves it, personally, but process-wise, I think it makes no sense to hold an open process that isn't really open.
David Chandler.
I don't understand the concern about optics because Mark Kaufman gave a very compelling reason why we should vote the previous motion down. And I was the only one that agreed with him and voted against it. And I thought we would come up with a different nomination so that Don could get an award because he obviously deserves it. I don't understand why we're concerned about optics. I think we should just, I agree with Michael that we should just go ahead and award it to him because that's what we want to do and we think it's the right thing.
Any further discussion, board? All right, so we have a motion and a second. I will then call the question. So all those in favor of the motion to nominate Don Collins for the Stafford Award, please raise your hand and leave it up. I count 11. All those opposed? I count 1, but Colleen and Dan MacArthur, were your hands up from before?
Yes, mine was. I'm sorry. I was an I on that. Yeah,
Okay.
sorry.
All right, lower that hand.
Yeah, there we go.
My hand is lowered, but I still feel that the process is a bit skewed.
Yeah, all right, so that the motion passes 11-1. All right, we're struggling our way through this awards committee stuff, gang. We're gonna go to the next part of it. Mark, do we want to turn it over to you again for an explanation of the award committee's rationale and decision here?
Sorry, my computer keeps freezing on and off, so I'm going to turn my video off. Hopefully it will be smooth. So next part, that is the Exceptional School Board Leadership Award. And the committee had a discussion about whether this should remain an award that is presented only to a entire school board, or whether we could open it up to board chairs as well. And ultimately came to a compromise position. I'm not sure compromise is the right word, but a middle of the road position that I think Adrian came up with, which was to make it an award that is granted to a school board or board chair of a district, union school, career technical center, etc., and exemplifies, consistently demonstrates an understanding the role and responsibility of school board or board chair relative to administrators, teachers, and citizens, consistently demonstrates effective and ethical operations, and has made demonstrable contributions to the well-being of students, and or has made demonstrable contributions to the effective and efficient operations of the education system that they oversee, and or contributed to the cause of public education in Vermont. Which I believe is more or less the same criteria as we've always had. Neil, is that correct?
I believe so. I am going to jump in here though, because the one thing that strikes me as I was thinking through this one is that can I confirm the committee didn't have any recommendation for a recipient for this award, correct, at this stage?
That is correct. This would be opened up to all VSBA membership, and we would take nominations.
Right. So I think based on that fact, based on the fact that I'm looking that it's 8:01 p.m. and based on the fact that the change to the criteria here is a little bit more extensive than what we were considering for the other one. I think I want to just defer this item for discussion and decision to the next board meeting. Unless anybody is vehemently opposed with that suggestion.
Fine with me.
Okay. With that, though, I do want to see if I can just get a motion for approval of the consent agenda at this time, because I would like to get that passed.
I will make that motion.
Sorry.
All right, so that was a motion by Mark Schauber, a second by Gaston to approve the consent agenda. Any discussion? All board members in favor, please raise your hand. That one is unanimous. Thank you, board. The only item for new business, I'm just going to alert board members, be on the lookout for the executive director evaluation that will be coming out soon for you to complete. And then we will compile that and have discussion on it at the retreat. I don't have any other items of new business to report.
I just doing a little research while on it. It does. I'm not sure where the bell came from, but I'm pretty darn sure it's Robert T. Stafford was a senator and governor of the state of Vermont, from the state of Vermont. And it's there's
the history.
Robert T. Stafford Student Loan Program. Yeah, good.
I have the history and all the people that received it. I can provide that to you if you want.
Yeah. No, just curious, and that, you know, how it got created in the first place. Anyway. Okay.
Yeah, so unless anybody's got anything else that they want to bring up at 8:03 p.m., I am going to look for a motion to adjourn. Floor with the motion, Adrian with the second. Thank you, board. All those in favor, please have a good evening. Okay. Thank you, folks. Sorry for running over this evening.
Thank you. Good night.